Know what time it is? Gotcha! I'd sooner die defying gravity. No, I'm just kidding. Hi. Hello, lovelies. How we doing? This light is making me look very bright and glowy. Hi. Welcome back to Storytime with Chris After Dark. Now, keep in mind, you don't have to watch these videos when they go live. You're more than welcome to watch them in your downtime, now time, max and relax and chillax time, in between time, mean time, scheme time, study time, break time, CP time, anytime that you want to hear a highly animated voice bring you wonderful stories of magic, fantasy, science fiction, adventure, and many, many more in between. Now, this is Storytime with Chris After Dark, so this is for the adults only, meaning if you are not 18 and older, you should not be watching this video. This is not for you kids. Please go ahead and tune in to Bluey, PJ Masks, Paw Patrol, Miraculous Ladybug, The Magic School Bus, DuckTales, Darkwing Duck, Gummy Bears, Care Bears, Tailspin, Goof Troop. Trying to think of what else I missed. Quack Pack, which is the sequel to DuckTales, but that's of my time. Gargoyles, Little Mermaid, Aladdin. Watch something else, okay? This is for the adults only. I repeat, if you are a child watching this video is not for you, sweetie. Go ahead and log off for me, head on to bed, or, find something to do. Color, make a picture, write a story. This video is not for you. Repeat, if you are not 18 and above, you should not be watching this video. All right. Yes, I got my Cinderella mug. Gotta put my hand behind the product. There we go. A dream is a wish your heart makes when you're fast asleep. Yes. That song has always stuck in my heart and will continue to remain in my heart forever and always. Now, you didn't come to hear me blather, you came to hear a story. We just got the introduction of Elphaba's birth into Caldwin Grounds in Munchkinland, and Frexspar, aka Frex, who is Elphaba's dad, is trying to minister to people, and the Time Dragon, which is a traveling puppet show theatrical performance that is also very prophetic and tells the truths about the places that it goes to. The Time Dragon almost gets Frexspar killed by a mob. So we're going to find out what happened to Melina and Elphaba with the midwives and nurses that were there to help her with Elphaba's birth. The fact that Elphaba came out as green and bit off one of the fingers of the nursemaids that were helping her mom deliver her, and they were all contemplating to kill the child, but have since retracted that, and were able to hide Melina and Elphaba inside none other than the clockwork inner workings of the Time Dragon, the traveling theater and puppet show that goes around. It's a huge contraption. So let's go ahead, fasten your seatbelts, let's get into it. Oh, okay. There we go. And no, I don't own the music that you're listening to in the background. Maladies and remedies. For days, Melina couldn't bear to look at the thing. She held it as a mother must. She waited for the groundwater of maternal affection to rise and overwhelm her. She did not weep. She chewed pinlobble leaves to float away from the disaster. It was a she. It was a her. Melina practiced conversations in her thinking when she was alone. The twitching, unhappy bundle was not male. It was not neutered. It was a female. It slept looking like a heap of cabbage leaves washed and left to drain on the table. In a panic, Melina wrote to Colwyn Grounds to drag Nanny from her retirement. Frex went ahead in a carriage to collect Nanny from the way station at Stone Spar End. On the trip back, Nanny asked Frex what was wrong. "What is wrong?" he sighed and was lost in thought. Nanny realized she had chosen her words poorly. Now Frex was distracted. He began to mumble in a general way about the nature of evil. A vacuum set up by the inexplicable absence of the unnamed god into which spiritual poison must rush. A vortex. "I mean, what is the state of the child?" retorted Nanny explosively. "It's not the universe, but a single child I need to hear about. If I'm going to be of any help, why does Melina call for me instead of her own mother? Why is there no letter for her grandfather? He's the eminent Throp. For goodness sakes, Melina can't have forgotten her duty so thoroughly. Or is it life out there in the country worse than we thought?" "It's worse than we thought," said Frex grimly. "The baby... You had better be prepared, Nanny, so you don't scream. The baby is damaged." "Damaged?" Nanny's grip on her valise tightened and she looked out over the red leaf pearl fruit trees by the side of the road. "Frex, tell me everything." "It's a girl," said Frex. "Damage indeed," said Nanny mockingly, but Frex had usual missed the dig. "Well, at least the family title's preserved for another generation. Has she got all her limbs?" "Yes." "Any more than she needs?" "No." "Is she sucking?" "We can't let it. It has extraordinary teeth, Nanny. It has shark's teeth or something like that." "Well, she won't be the first child to grow on a bottle or a rag instead of a tit. Don't worry about that." "It's the wrong color," said Frex. "What color is the wrong color?" Shoutouts to Nanny. She's awesome. For a few moments, Frex could only shake his head. Nanny did not like him, and she would not like him, but she softened. "Frex, it can't be that bad. There's always a way out. Tell Nanny." "It's green," he finally said. "Nanny, it's green as moss." "She's green, you mean? It's a she, for heaven's sakes." "It's not for heaven's sake," Frex began to weep. "Heaven is not improved by it, Nanny, and heaven does not approve. What are we to do?" "Hush." Nanny detested weeping men. "It can't be as bad as all that. There isn't a sniff of low blood in Melina's veins. Whatever blight the child has will respond to Nanny's treatment. Trust Nanny." "I trust in the unnamed God," sobbed Frex. "We don't always work out at cross purposes. God and Nanny," said Nanny. She knew this was blasphemous, but she couldn't resist a gib as long as Frex's resistance was down. "But don't worry, I won't breathe a word to Melina's family. We'll sort this all out in a flash, and no one need know. The baby has a name." "Elphaba," he said. "After Saint Elphaba of the Waterfall?" "Yes." "A fine old name. You'll use the common nickname Fabula, I suppose." "Who even knows if she'll live long enough to grow into a nickname?" Frex sounded as if he had hoped this would be the case. "Interesting country. Are we in Wind Hardings yet?" Nanny asked to change the subject, but Frex had folded up inside, barely bothering to guide the horse into the correct track. The country was filthy, depressed, peasant-ridden. Nanny began to wish she had not set out in her best traveling gown. Roadside robbers might expect to find gold on such a refined-looking older woman, and they would be right, for Nanny sported a golden garter stolen years ago from her ladyship's boudoir. What a humiliation if the garter would turn up these years later on Nanny's well-turned, if aging, thigh. But Nanny's fears were unfounded, for the carriage arrived without incident in the yard of the minister's cottage. "Let me see the baby first," said Nanny. "It'll be easier and fairer on Melina if I know what we're dealing with." And this wasn't hard to arrange, as Melina was out cold thanks to pinlobble leaves, while the baby in a basket on the table wailed softly. So pinlobble leaves is the equivalency, in my opinion, of... Well, it kind of reminds me of A Brave New World by Aldous Huxley, Soma. It's a drug. Like, they're hallucinogenics. psychedelic, excuse me. So it's kind of like, I wouldn't say it's like acid or anything like that. It's more so, the best way to describe Penlop leaves, in my opinion, is kind of like, I'm trying to find it. I'm unable to articulate it at the moment. Forgive me. It's kind of like, it just gives her a euphoric feeling. It gets her high, so she doesn't have to deal with life. It just is a depressant. It allows you to get high and basically do nothing, which is not the best way to deal with postpartum, from what I've been told from other women. But Nanny drew up a chair so she wouldn't hurt herself if she fainted dead away. Frex, put the basket on the floor where I can look at it. Frex obliged and then went to return the horses and carriage to Beef, who rarely needed them for mayoral duties but loaned them out to earn a little political capital. The infant was wrapped in linens. Nanny saw the baby's mouth and ears were strapped with a sling. The nose looked like a knob of bad mushroom poking up for air, and the eyes were open. Nanny leaned closer. The child couldn't be, 3 weeks old? Yet as Nanny moved from side to side looking at the profile of the forehead from this angle and that, so as to judge the shape of the mind, the girl's eyes tracked her back and forth. They were brown and rich, the color of overturned earth flecked with mica. There was a network of fragile red lines at each soft angle where the eyelids met, as if the girl had been bursting the blood threads from the exertion of watching and understanding. And the skin, oh yes, the skin was as green as sin. Not an ugly color, Nanny thought, just not a human color. She reached out and let her finger drift across the baby's cheek. The infant flinched, and her backbone arched, and the wrapping, which was tucked securely around the child from neck to toe, split open like a husk. Nanny gritted her teeth and was determined not to be cowed. The baby had exposed herself, sternum to groin, and the skin on her chest was the same remarkable color. Have you ever touched this child yet, you two? Murmured Nanny. She put her hand palm down on the child's heaving chest, her fingers covering the most invisible baby nipples, then slid her hand down as she should check the apparatus below. The child was wet and soiled, but felt made according to standard design. The skin was the same miracle of pliant smoothness that Melina had possessed as an infant. Come to Nanny, you horrid little thing. Nanny leaned to pick the baby up, mess and all. The baby swiveled to avoid the touch. Her head beat itself against the rush bottom of the basket. You've been dancing in the womb, I see, said Nanny. I wonder to whose music. Such well-developed muscles. No, you're not getting away from me. Come here, you little demon. Nanny doesn't care. Nanny likes you. She was lying through her teeth, but unlike Frex, she believed some lies were sanctioned by heaven. And she got her hands on Elphaba and settled her on her lap. There, Nanny waited, crooning and every now and then looking away out of the window to recover herself and keep from vomiting. She rubbed the baby's belly to calm the girl down, and there was no calming her down. Not yet, anyway. Melina propped herself up on her elbows in the late afternoon when Nanny brought a tray with tea and bread. I've made myself at home, said Nanny. I've made friends with your tiny darling. Now come to your senses, sweetheart, and let me give you a kiss. Oh, Nanny. Melina allowed herself to be coddled. Thank you for coming. Have you seen the little monster? She's adorable, said Nanny. Don't lie and don't be soft, said Melina. If you're going to help, you must be honest. If I'm going to help, you must be honest, said Nanny. We need not go into it now, but I will have to know everything, my sweet, so we can decide what's to be done. They sipped their tea, and because Elphaba had fallen asleep at last, it seemed for a few moments like the old days at Colwood Grounds when Melina would come home from afternoon walks with some lithesome young gentry on the make and boast of their masculine beauty to a Nanny who pretended she had not noticed. In fact, as the weeks went on, Nanny noticed quite a few disturbing things about the baby. For one thing, Nanny tried to remove the baby's bandages, but Elphaba seemed intent on biting her own hands off, and the teeth inside that pretty thin-lipped mouth were indeed monstrous. She would bite a hole through the basket if she were left unfettered. She went after her own shoulder and scraped it raw. She looked as if she was strangling. Can't a barber be had to pull the teeth out? Nanny asked, at least until the baby learns some self-control. You're out of your mind, Melina said. It'll be all over the valley that the little marrow is green. We'll keep the jaw strapped up until we solve the skin problem. How in the world did her skin come green? Nanny wondered stupidly, for Melina blanched and Frex reddened, and the baby held her breath as if trying to turn blue to please them all. Nanny had to slap her to make her breathe again. Nanny interviewed Frex out in the yard. After the double blow of the birth and his public embarrassment, he was not yet up to professional engagement as he sat whittling praying beads out of oak, scoring and inscribing them with emblems of the namelessness of God. Nanny set Elphaba down inside. She had an unreasonable fear of being overheard by this infant, and worse, of being understood. And Nanny sat scooping out a pumpkin for supper. I don't suppose, Frex, that you have green in your family background? She began, knowing full well that Melina's powerful grandfather would have confirmed such a predisposition before agreeing to let his granddaughter marry a unionist minister, of all the chances she had. Our family isn't about money or about earthly power, said Frex, taking no offense for once, but I'm descended in a direct line from 6 ministers before me, father to son. We're as well regarded in spiritual circles as Melina's family is in parlors and at the court of Ozma. And no, there is no green anywhere. I've never heard of such a thing before in any family. Nanny nodded and said, Well, all right. I was only asking. I know you're gooder than goblin martyrs. But, Frex said humbly, Nanny, I think I caused this thing to happen. My tongue slipped on the day of the birthday. I announced that the devil was coming. I meant the clock of the time dragon. But suppose those words unlocked room for the devil. The child is no devil, snapped Nanny. She's no angel either, she thought, but kept it to herself. On the other hand, Frex continued, sounding more secure, she may have been cursed by Melina. Accidentally, she took my remark the wrong way and wept about it. Maybe Melina opened up herself a window through which an unattached spirit entered and colored the child. On the very day she is to be born, said Nanny, that's a capable sprite. It's your goodness so exalted that you attracted the truly high-powered among the spirits of aberration? Frex shrugged. A few weeks earlier he would have nodded, but his confidence was shattered with his abject failure in rush margins. He did not dare suggest what he feared. The child's abnormality was a punishment for his failure to protect his flock from the pleasure faith. Well, Nanny said practically, if through a curse the goods were damaged, then through what might the ill be overturned? An exorcism, said Frex. Are you empowered? If I'm successful at changing her, we'll know that I'm empowered, said Frex. But now he had a goal. His spirits brightened. He would spend his days in fasting, rehearsing prayers, and collecting supplies for the arcane ritual. When he was off in the woods and Elphaba napping, Nanny perched on the side of Melina's hard marriage mattress. Frex wonders if his prediction that the devil was coming caused a window in you to open, letting an imp pass through to spoil the baby, said Nanny. She was crocheting an edge of lace clumsily. She had never excelled at piecework, but she liked handling the polished ivory crochet hook. I wonder if you opened another window, Melina, groggy from pin-lobble leaves as usual, arched in eyebrow confusion. Did you sleep with someone other than Frex? Nanny asked. Don't be mad, said Melina. I know you, honey, said Nanny. I'm not saying you're not a good wife, but you had the boys buzzing around you in your parents' orchard. You changed your perfume undergarments more than once a day. You were lusty and sneaky and good at it. I'm not looking down on you, but don't pretend to me that your appetites weren't healthy. Melina buried her face in the pillow. Oh, for those days, she wailed. It's not that I don't love Frex, but I hate being better than the local peasant idiots. Well, now, this green child brings you down to their level. You ought to be pleased, said Nanny meanly. Nanny, I love Frex, but he leaves me alone so often. I would kill for some tinker to pass by and sell me more than a tin coffee pot. I would pay well for someone less godly and more imaginative. That's a question for the future, said Nanny sensibly. I'm asking you about the past, the recent past since your marriage. Melina's face was vague and blurry. She nodded. She shrugged. She rocked her head. The obvious theory is an elf, said Nanny. I wouldn't have sex with an elf, Melina shrieked. No more would I, said Nanny, but the green does give one pause. Are there elves in the neighborhood? There's a gaggle of them, tree elves, up over the hill someplace. But if possible, they're more moronic than the fair citizens of Rush Margins. Really, Nanny, I've never even seen one, or only from a distance. The idea's repulsive. Elves giggle at everything, do you know that? One of them falls out of an oak and smashes his skull like a rotten turnip, and they gather and giggle, then forget about him. It's insulting of you for even to bring it up. Get used to it if we don't find a way out of this quagmire. Well, the answer is no. Then someone else, someone handsome enough on the outside, but carrying a germ that maybe you caught? Melina looked shocked. She hadn't thought of her own health since Elphaba was born. Could she be a risk? The truth, said Nanny. We must know. The truth, said Melina distantly. Well, it is unknowable. What are you trying to say? I don't know the answer to your question, and Melina explained. Yes, the cottage was off the beaten track, and of course she never passed more than the courteous greetings with local farmers and fishermen and thickheads, but more travelers took to the hills and woods than you would credit. Often she had sat listless and lowly while Frex was off preaching, and she found herself comfort in giving passers-by a simple meal and a buoyant conversation. And more? But on those boring days, Melina muttered, she had taken to chewing pinlopple leaves. When she would awake because the sun was setting or Frex was there frowning or grinning at her, she remembered little. You mean you indulged in adultery and you don't even have the benefit of a good saucy memory about it? Nanny was scandalized. I don't know that I did, said Melina. I wouldn't choose to. I mean, not if I was thinking clearly. But I remember once when a tinker with a funny accent gave me a draught of some heady brew from a green glass bottle. And I had a rare expanse of dreams, Nanny, of the other world. Cities of glass and smoke, noise and color. I try to remember. So you could well have been raped by elves. Won't your grandfather be pleased to learn how Frex is taking care of you? Honestly. Stop, cried Melina. Well, I don't know what's to be done. Nanny lost her temper at last. Everyone's being irresponsible. If you can't remember whether your marriage vows have been broken or not, there's not much good in acting like an offended saint. We can always drown the baby and start over. Just try drowning that thing, muttered Nanny. I pity the poor lake asked to take her in. Later, Nanny went through Melina's small collection of medicines, herbs, drops, roots, brandies, leaves. She was wondering without much hope if she could invent something that might cause the girl's skin to blanch. In the back of the chest, Nanny found the green glass bottle spoken of by Melina. The light was bad, and her eyes weren't strong, but she could make out the words, Miracle Elixir, on a piece of paper pasted to the front. Though she had a native skill in healing, Nanny was unable to come up with a skin-changing potion. Bathing the child in cow's milk didn't make the skin white either, but the child would not allow herself to be lowered into a pail of lake water. She twisted like a cat in panic. Nanny kept on with the cow's milk. It left a horrid sour stink if she did not rub it off thoroughly with a cloth. Frex organized an exorcism. It involved candles and hymns. Nanny watched from a distance. The man was beady-eyed, perspiring with effort, even through the mornings were colder and colder. Elphaba slept in her binding cloth in the middle of the carpet, oblivious to the sacrament. Nothing happened. Frex fell, exhausted and spent, and cradled his green daughter within the crook of his arm, as if finally embracing the proof of some undisclosed sin. Melina's face hardened. There was only one thing left to try. Nanny gathered the courage to bring it up on the day she was to leave back for Colwyn grounds. I see that peasant treatments don't work, said Nanny, and spiritual intercession has failed. Do you have the courage to think about sorcery? Is there someone local who could magic the green venom out of the child? Frex was up, lashing out at Nanny, swinging his fists. Nanny fell backward off her stool, and Melina bobbed about her, shrieking, "How dare you!" cried Frex. "In this household, isn't this green girl insult enough? Sorcery is a refuge of the immoral. When it isn't out-and-out charlatanism, it is dangerously evil. Contracts with the demons." Nanny said, "Oh, preserve me, you fine, fine man. Don't you know enough to fight fire with fire?" "Nanny, enough," said Melina. "Hitting a feeble old woman," said Nanny Herd, "who only tries to help." The next morning, Nanny packed her valise. There was nothing more that she could do. She wasn't willing to live the rest of her life with a fanatical hermit and a ruined baby, even for the sake of Melina. Frex drove Nanny back to the inn at Stone Spar Inn for the coach and four to take her home. Nanny knew Melina might still think about killing the child, but somehow she doubted it. Nanny held her valise to her ample bosom, fearing bandits again. Inside her valise was hidden a gold garter. She had also had squirreled away the ivory crochet hook, 3 of Frex's prayer beads because she liked the carvings, and the pretty green glass bottle left behind by some itinerant salesman selling, apparently, dreams and passion and somnolence. It's coming from the word somnus, who is the Greek god of sleep, somnolence. So it's referring to an air of sleepiness or comfort or relaxation. She didn't know what she thought. Was Elphaba demon spawn? Was she half-elf? Was she punishment for her father's failure as a preacher or for her mother's sloppy morals and bad memory? Or was she merely a physical ailment, a blight like a misshapen apple or a 5-legged calf? Nanny knew her worldview was foggy and chaotic, pestered by demons, faith, and folk science. It didn't escape her attention, however, that both Melina and Frex had believed uncompromisingly that they would have a boy. Frex was the 7th son of a 7th son, and to add to that powerful equation, he was descended from 6 ministers in a row. Whatever child of either sex could dare follow in so auspicious a line? Perhaps, thought Nanny, little green Elphaba chose her own sex and her own color, and to hell with her parents. Oh, we get to meet one of my favorite characters. Yes! The Quadling Glassblower. For one short, wet month early in the next year, the drought lifted. Spring tipped in like green well water, frothing at the edges, bubbling at the roadside, splashing from the cottage roof in garlands of ivy and string flower. Melina went about the yard in a state of mild undress so that she could feel the sun on her pale skin and the deep warmth she had missed all winter. Strapped in her chair in the doorway, Elphaba, now a year and a half old, hit her breakfast minnow with the bowl of her spoon. "Oh, eat the thing, don't mash it," said Melina, but mildly. Since the child's chin sling had been removed, mother and daughter began to pay some attention to each other. To her surprise, Melina sometimes found Elphaba endearing, the way a baby should be. This view was the only thing she had seen since leaving the elegant mansion of her family, the only thing she would ever gaze upon again. The wind-swept surface of Illswater, the distant dark stone cottages and chimneys of rush margins on the other side, the hills lying in a torpor beyond. She would go mad. The world was nothing but water and want. If a frolic of elves scampered through the yard, she would leap on them for company, for sex, for murder. "Your father is a fraud," she said to Elphaba. "Off finding himself all winter, leaving me with only you for company. Eat that breakfast, for you'll get no more if you throw it on the ground." Elphaba picked up the fish and threw it on the ground. "Your father is a charlatan," continued Melina. "He used to be very good in bed for a religious man, and this is how I know his secret. Holy men are supposed to be above earthly pleasures, but your father enjoyed his midnight wrestling. Once upon a time, we must never tell him we know he's a humbug. It would break his heart. We don't want to break his heart, do we?" And then Melina burst into a high peal of laughter. Elphaba's face was unsmiling, unchanging. She pointed to the fish. "Breakfast. Breakfast in the dirt. Breakfast for the bugs," Melina said. She dropped the collar of her spring robe a little lower, and the pink yoke of her bare shoulders gyrated. "Shall we go walk by the edge of the lake today and maybe you'll drown?" But Elphaba would never drown. Never. Because she would not go near the lake. "Maybe we'll go out in a boat and tip over," Melina shrieked. Elphaba cocked her head to one side as if listening for some part of her mother not intoxicated with leaves and wine, just like this. The sun swept out from behind a cloud. Elphaba scowled. Melina's robe dropped lower. Her breasts worked their way out from between the dirty ruffles of the collar. Look at me, thought Melina, showing my breast to the child I couldn't give milk to for fear of amputation. I, who was the rose of Nest Hardings, I, who was the beauty of my generation, and now I'm reduced to company I don't even want. My own squirming, thorny little girl. She is more grasshopper than girl, with those angular little thighs, those arching eyebrows, those poking fingers. She's about the business of learning like any child. But she takes no delight in the world. She pushes and breaks and nibbles on things without any pleasure. As if she has a mission to taste and measure all the disappointments of life, in which much margins is amply supplied. Mercy for the unnamed God. She's a creep, she is. She is. Or we might take a walk in the woods today and pick the last of the winter berries. Melina is full of guilt at her lack of motherly feeling. We can put them in a pie. Can we put them in a pie? Shall we, honey? Elphaba didn't speak yet, but she nodded and began to wiggle to get down. Melina started a clapping game Elphaba took no notice of. The child grunted and pointed to the ground and arched her long legs to illustrate her desire. Then she gestured to the gate leading from the kitchen garden and the hen yard. There was a man at the uprights of the gate, leaning shyly and hungry-looking, with skin the color of roses at twilight, a dusky, shadowy red. He had a couple of leather satchels on his shoulders and back, and a walking staff, and a dangerously handsome, hollow-looking face. Melina screeched and caught herself, directing her voice to a lower register. It had been so long she had spoken to anyone but a whining toddler. "Good glory, you startled us!" she cried. "Are you searching for some breakfast?" She had lost the social touch. For instance, her breast should not be staring at him so, yet she did not clasp her gown. "Please to forgive a sudden appearance by a strange foreigner at Lady's Gate," said the man. Forgiven, of course," she said impatiently. "Come in where I can see you. Come in. Come in." Elphaba had seen so few other people in her life that she hid one eye behind her spoon and peeked with the other one. The man approached. His movements showed the clumsiness of exhaustion. He was large of ankle and thick of foot, slender about the waist and shoulders, and thick again in the neck, as if he had been made on a lathe and worked too briefly at the extremities. His hand, letting down the satchels, seemed like beasts with minds of their own. They were outsized and splendid. "Traveler not to know where he is," said the man. "2 nights to cross the hills from downhill Cornings, to look for the inn at 3 Dead Trees, to rest." "You're lost. You veered," said Melina, deciding not to be perplexed by his scrambled words. "No matter. Let me fix you a meal and you can tell me your story." Her hands were at her hair, which once used to be thought precious as spun brass. At least it was clean. The man was slick and fit. When he removed his cap, his hair fell out in greasy hanks, sunset red. He washed at the pump, stripping off his shirt, and Melina noticed he was nice to see a waist on a man. Frexbar, bless him, had run to plumpness in the year and some since Elphaba's birth. Were all quadlings this deliciously dusty rose color? The man's name, Melina learned, was Turtleheart, and he was a glass-blower from Ovels, a little-known quadling country. So, let's break down a couple of things. In the middle is the Emerald City, the capital of the Land of Oz. Up north, we got Munchkin Country. In the west, we have the Winky Country. In the east, we have Gillikin Country. And in the south, is Quadling Country. And then there's the land of Ugaboo, the land of Maricor, the land of Gnomes. It's like different other countries surrounding the country of Oz. This is all canonical to the original L. Frank Baum books, as well as the Wicked Years novels, which we're only going to read the first one unless I get a huge response to read the sequel. She bundled up her breasts at last, reluctantly. Elphaba squawked to be let loose, and without so much as flinching, the visitor unbuckled her and swept her in the air and caught her again. The child crowed with surprise, even delight, and Turtleheart repeated the trick. Melina took advantage of his concentration on the brat to scoop up the uneaten minnow from the dirt and rinse it off. She plopped it among the eggs and mashed tar root, hoping that Elphaba would not suddenly learn to speak and embarrass her. It'd be just like the child to do that. But Elphaba was too charmed by this man to fuss or complain. She didn't even whine when Turtleheart finally came to the bench and sat to eat. She crawled between his slick, hairless calves, and she moaned some private tune with a satisfied smirk on her face. Melina found herself jealous of a female not yet 2 years old. She wouldn't have minded sitting on the ground between Turtle Heart's legs. I've never met a quadling before, she said too loudly, too brightly. The months of solitude had made her forget her manners. My family would never have quadlings in to dine. Not that there were many, or even any for all I'd know. In the farmlands around my family's estate, the stories make out that quadlings were sneaky and incapable of telling the truth. How can a quadling answer such a charge if a quadling is given always to lie? He smiled at her. She melted like butter on warm bread. I'll believe anything you say. He told her of the life in the outreaches of ovals, the houses rotting gently into the swamp, the harvest of snails and milkweed, the customs of communal living and ancestor worship. So you believe your ancestors are with you? She prodded. I don't mean to be nosy, but I've become interested in religion despite myself. Does Lady to believe ancestors are with her? She could hardly focus on the question. So bright were his eyes, so wonderful was it to be called Lady. Her shoulders straightened. My immediate ancestors could be farther away, she admitted. I mean my parents, they're still living, but so uninteresting to me they might as well be dead. When dead, they may to visit Lady often. They are not welcome. Go away, she laughed, chewing. You mean ghosts? They better not. That's what I'd call the worst of both worlds, if there is an other land. There is another land, he said with certainty. She felt chilled. She scooped up Elphaba and hugged her tightly. Elphaba sagged as if boneless in her arms, neither fussing nor returning the hug, just falling limp from the novelty of being touched. Are you a seer? Said Melina. Turtle heart to blow glass, he said. He seemed to mean that as his answer. Melina was suddenly reminded of the dreams she used to have, of exotic places she knew she was too dull to invent. Married to a minister, and I don't know that I believe in another world, she admitted. She hadn't meant to say that she was married, although she was supposed the child implicated her. But Turtle Heart had finished talking. He put out his plate. He had left the minnow, and he took from his satchels a small pot, a pipe, and some sacks of sand and soda ash and lime and other materials. Might Turtle Heart to thank Lady for her welcome? He asked. She nodded. He built up the kitchen fire and sorted and mixed his ingredients and arranged utensils and cleaned the bowl of his pipe with a special rag folded in its own pouch. Elphaba sat clump-like, her green hands on her green toes, curiosity on her sharp-pinched face. Melina had never seen glass blown, just as she had never seen paper made, cloth woven, or logs hewn from tree trunks. It seemed as marvelous to her as the local stories of the traveling clock that had hexed her husband into the professional paralysis from which he still hadn't quite escaped, though he tried. Turtle Heart hummed a note through his nose or the pipe as he blew an irregular bulb of hot greenish ice. It steamed and hissed in the air, and he knew what to do with it. He was a wizard of glass. Melina had to hold Elphaba back to keep her from burning her hands as she reached for it. It would seem like no time at all in what felt like magic. The glass had gone from being semi-liquid and abstract to a hardening, cooling reality. It was a smoothing, impure circle like a slightly oblong plate. All the while, Turtle Heart worked with it. Melina thought of her own character going from youthful ether to hardening shell, transparently empty. Breakable, too. But before she could lose herself in remorse, Turtle Heart took her 2 hands and passed them near, but not touching, the flat surface of the glass. Lady to talk with ancestors, he said. But she would not struggle to connect with old, boring, dead people in the other land, not when his huge hands covered her. She breathed through her nose to suppress the smell of breakfast in an unwashed mouth. She thought she might well faint. Look in glass, he urged her. She could only look at his neck and his raspberry honey-colored chin. He looked for her. Elphaba came and steadied herself with a small hand on his knee and peered in too. Husband is near, said Turtle Heart. Was this prophecy through a glass dish, or was he asking her a question? But he went on. Husband is traveling on a donkey, and to bring elderly woman to visit you. His ancestor to visit? Is nursemaid, probably, Melina said, as she was sloping downward into his crippled syntax in unabashed sympathy. Can you really to see that in there? He nodded. Elphaba nodded too. But at what? How much time do we have before he gets here, she asked. Till this evening. They did not speak another word until sunset. They banked the fire and hooked Elphaba to a harness and sat her down in front of the cooling glass, which they hung on a string like a lens or a mirror. It seemed to mesmerize and calm her. She did not even gnaw absentmindedly at her wrists or toes. They left the door to the cottage open so that from time to time they could peer out from the bed to check on the child, who in the glare of a sunny day would not be able to focus her eyes to see in the house shadows, and who anyway never turned to look. Turtle Heart was unbearably beautiful. Melina dragon-snaked with him, covered with him with her mouth, poured him in her hands, heated and cooled and shaped his luminosity. He filled her emptiness. They were washed and dressed, with supper mostly made, with the donkey braid a half-mile down the lake. Melina blushed. Turtle Heart was back at the pipe blowing again. Elphaba turned and looked in the direction of the donkey's serrated statement. Her lips, which always looked almost black against the new apple color of her skin, twisted tight, chewed against each other. She bit her lower lip as if thinking, but she did not bleed. She had learned to manage the teeth somewhat through trial and error. She put her hand on the shining disc. The glass circlet caught the last blue of the sky until it looked like a magic mirror showing nothing but silver, cold water within. And that is where we will end for tonight. I'm telling you, the story gets scandalous. This story gets scandalous. Told you, this is not gonna be, and like the musical adapts the story very well. I will give it that. It does a beautiful job of breaking down the multi-layered conversation of the wickedness of human behavior in multiplicitous different instances in this novel alone. And in a way, what it does is it allows us as the reader to view these characters who, to those who read the L. Frank Baum Oz series, are very endearing and timeless and youthful and exuberant. But the reality of it is that human beings, and just people in general, are complex creatures, both good and bad. Neither purely good or neither purely evil. It's just sometimes life and circumstances pull us to different sides, and we have to choose which one is which. And I will see you all next Friday. Bye-bye.